All right, so last time we talked about why we need lightweight cryptography and made a small introduction. So now we are going to talk about target devices and performance metrics. So target devices is important for me because in the literature, you will see a lot of academic papers talking about constrained devices, which doesn't have much memory or battery or computational power. So for this reason, that academic paper introduced a new encryption algorithm, new protocol, and so on, so that it works fast on these constrained devices, right? But in the next section, they perform experiments on a Raspberry Pi. But the Raspberry Pi is not that a constrained device, right? It is a very powerful device. It doesn't have constrained memory. 4 gigabytes of memory is not that small, right? You can do a lot of stuff. Or having 4 cores is not that much of a bad computational power. So when we say target devices, we are actually talking about really small devices. So this is why I wanted to talk about. So last time I mentioned this lightweight cryptography project. So in 2013, NIST initiated a lightweight cryptography project to study the performance of the current NIST-approved cryptographic standards on constrained devices. So because some people thought that AES, advanced encryption standard, cannot fit into every device. Sometimes you can fit it, but when you do it, the performance is not that as good as you want, or maybe you have latency problems and so on. So to understand the need for dedicated lightweight cryptography standards, and if the need is identified, to design a transparent process for standardization, NIST held 2 lightweight cryptography workshops to solicit public feedback on the constraints and limitations of the target devices, requirements and characteristics of real-world applications of lightweight cryptography. So initially, this was called lightweight cryptography project, and they wanted to see if they really needed a standard and see if they needed a competition. So talking to academicians and the people at the industry during these workshops, it turned out that people really want to have a standard, especially people at the industry. So at the end, NIST has decided to create a portfolio of lightweight algorithms through an open process. In NIST internal report 8114, report on lightweight cryptography, NIST aims to summarize the finding of lightweight cryptography project, outline NIST plans for standardization of lightweight algorithms. So NIST reports are publicly available, and I strongly recommend you to read them. But the feedback from industry was that if there is no standard, then none of the producers, manufacturers, or people who sell them will not put any security on this kind of small devices. This was the idea. And industry people said that if you do a competition, please choose a single winner, not 2 or 3. Because if you put 3 algorithms as a standard, then industry people have to put all 3 of them in their devices. But this is against the idea of lightweight, right? We are talking about small devices, and now we are trying to put 3 algorithms there. So they insisted on 1. Of course, academicians wanted to have more than 1 winner because that increased their chance of winning, right? But at the end, as I mentioned last time, the competition ended this February, and ASCON won. So here is the timetable actually for the workshops. So in the past, there were a lot of workshops. In 2019, I think the competition started with this NIST internal report. So the finalists announced in 2021. So there were 10 finalists. But recently, just like 7 months ago, I guess, right? NIST selects ASCON for standardization. After the selection, we still had a workshop, and probably we will keep having workshop because NIST, although NIST selects ASCON, you can use this algorithm for also different purposes. So maybe you can still use as a hash function because it supports hashing. So maybe if NIST sees it necessary, they can also select it as a lightweight hash function standard and so on. So NIST still ask feedbacks and still performs workshops to see how we are going. So of course, due to pandemic, last workshops were held virtually. But this is the web page where you can see the whole process, all of the candidates, all of the implementations, all of the benchmarks on software and hardware and so on. So I strongly recommend you to check them. Yeah, let's move on to target devices. These are actually a summary of NIST documents, okay? So lightweight cryptography targets a wide variety of devices that can be implemented on a broad spectrum of hardware and software. On the high end of the spectrum are servers, desktop computers, tablets, and smartphones. As you can see, these are really powerful devices. And generally, we don't have a better algorithm, but even here, especially for tablets and smartphones, if you have a more efficient algorithm, then your battery will last longer, right? So actually, this is why Google keeps using Cha-Cha instead of AES in their TLS communication. Anyway, we don't directly need a lightweight algorithm here. So, but the thing is that if we build a lightweight algorithm for small devices, those small devices will be communicating with these devices, right? So you need to implement and have an efficient implementation here too. Conventional cryptographic algorithms generally perform well in these devices, so they don't require lightweight algorithms, right? On the lower end of the spectrum are devices such as embedded systems, RFID devices, sensor networks, and so on. But with the IoT, I mean, even your coffee machine will have a small embedded system at the end, right? Lightweight cryptography is primarily focused on these highly constrained devices, so that is the idea. Let's talk about microcontrollers for this respect. Microcontrollers are available with a wide array of performance attributes. Although 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit microcontrollers are the most common, there are significant sales of 4-bit microcontrollers for certain ultra-low-cost applications. So this is where you actually need lightweight cryptography, right? A wide variety of instruction sets exist, which typically only contain a small number of simple instructions. So this is important because in modern CPUs or devices, you have many instructions, and in cryptographic algorithms, sometimes we use instructions like shift, XOR, etc., and we always assume that it is there. But there may be a device which doesn't have a shift instruction or something else, right? So you have to perform more instructions to get a single instruction there. So this is why the algorithm design and implementation actually is platform specific. So this may result in a large number of cycles to execute common cryptographic algorithms, which may make them too slow or energy consuming for the intended application. This is particularly a problem when it is necessary to satisfy real-time constraints using a limited amount of energy, because especially in IoT devices, sensors sometimes produce and send data in a very fast way. Maybe in a second they want to measure something 100 times and send it, right? So this way you need to make it fast, but also not much energy consuming so that the battery can last. Okay. For some microcontrollers, the amount of random access memory, RAM, and read-only memory, ROM, can be extremely limited. So when we say extremely limited, we are serious here. So for example, following microcontrollers can have 16 bytes of RAM or less, going down to as little as 16 bytes of RAM. So this is important. Just imagine where you have a 64 bytes of memory. Even Commodore 64 has 64 kilobytes of memory. Think about this. And also think about your current programming languages. In the past, when we used the programming language, the first thing you do was to write a code that says hello world. So you print it on the screen, right? So in the languages like C, when you compile such a thing, it doesn't consume much memory. But nowadays, when I ask students to do such an homework, they send me some executable which is megabytes, right? So having a 64 bytes of RAM or even 14 bytes of RAM are really important. So you need an algorithm that can work with such a small memory. That was for the microcontrollers. At the RFID and sensor network case, on the bottom of the spectrum, there are RFID and sensor networks, which are often realized in an application-specific integrated circuit like ASIC. In order to satisfy some of the most stringent implementation constraints, of particular interest are ultra-high frequency RFID tags, for example, tags using the widely deployed this Generation 2 standard, which is an ISO standards from 2015. For RFID tags that are not battery powered, only a limited amount of power is available from the environment. So this is important. Even in our smart cards, most of them, almost all of them, do not have a battery, right? You get the power from the environment. This is why you make it close to the reader so that you get the energy from there. So you have a very limited power. Such devices require cryptographic algorithms that not only use a very small amount of gate equivalence, but also meet stringent timing and power requirements. So lightweight algorithms may be subject to various other constraints, a topic that will be explored during the first phase of the standardization effort, and actually this was covered in most of the workshops. The aforementioned examples are therefore not intended to be an exhaustive list, but instead to illustrate settings where conventional algorithms cannot be implemented in order to understand the need for lightweight alternatives. So in all of these workshops, industry and academicians exchange ideas. So for instance, there was a talk called Cryptography in Industrial Embedded Systems, Our Experience of Needs and Constraints by Jean-Philippe Amoson and Anthony Vena. So with these workshops and this competition process, we actually understood what we need, and at the end, NIST chose an algorithm as the standard. So while lightweight cryptography primarily targets devices at low end of the device spectrum, it is important to note that it may be necessary to implement lightweight algorithms at the high end of the spectrum as well. For example, many resource-constrained sensors may send information to an aggregator that by most accounts is not constrained, right? So you need to have an efficient implementation there too. However, the aggregator must support lightweight algorithms in order to interoperate with the constrained sensor when they use lightweight cryptographic algorithms. In short, the environment and application need to be factored into the decision of whether or not convention standards are acceptable. It is not just the limitation of a particular device that drives the need for lightweight cryptography, but also the other devices in the application that it directly interacts with. So that is the main idea, okay? Some of the devices you are communicating may not support AES. So NIST now has two block encryption standards, right? One of them is AES, the other one is ASCO. But NIST says that use AES whenever you can. But if you cannot, then here's a lightweight alternative for you, which is ASCO. So this is how you should look at the problem. I mean, if AES fits and if gives you desirable performance, latency, and so on, you should use AES. Otherwise, you can use ASCO, which is lightweight.